The exhibition was conceived in response to the motorcycle, and it includes works by 15 contemporary Australian artists. Participants were asked to individualise a full-face helmet, which is where the title comes from, and to respond to its sculptural form. Their artworks engage with the interwoven themes of art and design that the motorcycle explores, or with related social, political, or environmental concerns. In fact, the helmet has long served to inspire artists. The work's in situ in the foyer of QagOMA, so it's in the foyer cabinet display, and you can see Reko's helmet here, and Monika's further along, next to Sean's. And just moving through each of the groupings, up to and including Nell, who's there at the end. So yes, the helmet has long served to inspire artists. As evidence, we might look to the sculptures of Henry Moore made in the 1950s, such as Helmet Head No. 2, which is in the collection of the Art Gallery of New South Wales, or more recently to Patricia Piccinini's morphed motorcycle helmets, including Team WAF Offspring and Team WAF Transducer from 2003. And then from this year, there's some artworks by Wiradjuri artist Carla Dickens, which she made War and Order 1 and War and Order 2. So these examples demonstrate that the helmet has its aesthetic and conceptual potential, and those ideas contributed to the conception for full face, as did a number of exhibitions within Australia and overseas that have also asked artists to individualise helmets. This one, for example, is 2020, which was shown at Vandal Gallery in Redfern in Sydney in 2017. It saw 20 artists asked to individualise a vintage D&D helmet in order to raise money for the Movember campaign. Monika, do you remember seeing these helmets when they were up?
No, I don't know.
Yeah. So, yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay.
Okay. Yeah, so there's been some history to this project. So I'm just going to run through quickly now and introduce our speakers in a little bit more detail. So Monika Behrens plays with established traditions of still life painting to reimagine the genre. A previous series, Bed Knobs and Broomsticks, which the artist made with her longtime collaborator and wife Rochelle Haley, features whimsical scenes that reference botanical illustration and also include allusions to female desire, as it relates to the stereotype of the witch and historical bias towards women's sexual power. The artists included plants such as hemlock, mandrake, and belladonna in the watercolours because of the species' fabled aphrodisiacal and also mind-altering qualities and their associations with links to witchcraft. And this is just a couple of more recent artworks which you can see that still life tradition coming through. And this is Monika's helmet. We'll return to that shortly. I'll just flick through Sean's works because they're here in the PowerPoint, and there's a possibility that he might be able to join us as we progress. So this is him standing in front of his video Approach to Mundi Mundi, which is actually in the exhibition as well. And then some works from 2007 in which he responds to the film Mad Max. And a work of art on the left-hand side, the reflected double bars, which was in some ways a precedent to his helmet in the exhibition, which is here. And then Reko Rennie draws on his interest in graffiti and his Kamilaroi heritage to conceive designs that declare, and I quote, who you are and where you are from. His artworks reflect his childhood growing up in Melbourne's western suburbs. He says, where I grew up, we made graffiti and worked with bright colours. A keen motorcyclist, Rennie has also created artworks about the iconic machine. His video Warriors Come Out to Play, made in 2014, was inspired by the 1979 films The Warriors and also Mad Max, and was made with Indonesian motorcyclists, including the collection artist Uji Handoko Eko Saputro, aka Han. So here's some work from 2011 and more recently in 2019, in which you can see the camouflage motif that he uses frequently in his work. And also, you know, you can see here that he's individualized artworks in the past. So the Opera House on the left-hand side, and a work on the right, Totemic from 2019, in which you can see the blue pigment that he often uses in his work. I mean, he'll be speaking about it himself in a minute. And here's the helmet itself, which is in the show. So we might just go back to the main, one of the main images, just so that you've got something to look at while we're talking. And I'll just start by talking to you about the approach that we made to you earlier this year. So the request to individualize a helmet probably came out of the blue in some ways at a time when the world had been turned upside down by COVID. I wondered what the project represented to you at that time and what your first thoughts were about bringing art and design together in this way.
For me, it was a relief. I had a show that opened in, I think it was February, just as COVID was like a week after COVID got serious. No, sorry, a week before. So it opened and then it was kind of by appointment. And that kind of left me with a strange place in the studio. So this playing with this helmet was a different way to approach what I do. And I kind of enjoyed playing around with it and getting back in the studio. Yeah, it helped me actually.
That's great.
Yeah.
And for me, look, you know, it was a fantastic opportunity. I mean, as you know, Samantha, I've got a long interest with motorcycles and cars and automotive interests, and in relation to art as well. And so, I think for me to have the opportunity to customize a helmet, you know, there were times in the past where I've, you know, drawn on helmets or put stickers on and things like that, and it was kind of an extension of that. So I wanted something that was quite simplistic because, you know, you've got this beautiful retro style helmet, and I thought for my work, I thought the line work would work really well on this design, and yeah, it was a great opportunity. Like Monika was saying, you know, during COVID and in lockdown, and particularly with us in Melbourne, you know, we had the enforced 5 kilometre radius, and so, you know, getting to and from the studio just was a bit of a mission actually. So
Yeah.
you know, it was nice to have a work like this to create, and it links to the previous works I've done before in terms of art and motorcycles.
Yeah, that's really great. We did actually had that in mind when we asked you to do the work, because that was something we were very conscious of, that, you know, exhibition opportunities and income earning opportunities had sort of shrunk, and it was one way we could reach out to people and ask them to be involved in a creative project. So yeah, I'd just like to start also by asking each of you to speak about your connection to motorcycles. Reko, you've already touched on that a bit, but we'll go into that in a little bit more detail and tell us a little bit more about your motorcycles and what have you, but also just how it influenced the artwork that you made for the show. I might just start with you, Monika, to say that, you know, you don't ride bikes. Reko obviously does, but you live in a suburb in Sydney where there's a large biker community, and I guess that might have been something that fed into your conversation around your work.
Yeah, I moved to Elwood about 2 years ago, and I didn't really know the area very much to start with. So I'd go on long walks around the area, and I noticed the suburb having garages with a few bikes in it, and then kept noticing it, and noticing that people were standing around talking about bikes in them, like just enjoying themselves talking about bikes. And then, like, my neighbour right across the road would have this tradition of revving his motorbike every Sunday afternoon with his son, cleaning it and revving it. And when I got my helmet, I started to pay a little more attention to them. Yeah, instead of getting frustrated with the sound, because I had a newborn, and, you know, it was kind of around nap time. So I started to pay more attention to them and worked out that it was more of a bonding experience between them, like getting to know each other more through this object. Yeah, so it was interesting.
That's a story that's coming out quite a bit. Actually, when we had the opening last night, people who came along from the gallery as well, just sharing stories when they grew up with their dad or what have you, going out on the bike and that kind of bonding experience. Reko, you have bikes, more than one. What sort of bike do you have? Tell us.
Yeah, look, I grew up, I grew up in Melbourne's western suburbs, and for me, my early, interest in bikes became something where, my friends and I would ride Pee-wee 80s and small motorcycles around the streets and be chased by the police, and thought that was a bit of fun. And that was a very normal thing, at that point in time in the early 80s to be doing around there, and, not as safe, of course, but I mean, that was something, riding dirt bikes really young, and then it just grew from there. And then, I've had had Ducatis and different bikes like that, and Vespers. I've got Vespers in the studio at the moment. I've got
I thought I saw a photograph with a Vesper in it as well.
Yeah, I've got a couple of Vespers that actually, one I brought back from Indonesia, or both I brought back from Indonesia, but one was the vehicle that was used in the video work, The Warriors Come Out to Play. And then I've got a CR 250, a vintage 70s Honda that was the same that used to be raced in California, and so I'm doing that up at the moment. And then, just they've always been an interest and had dirt bikes and things like that. So
there's a big section in the exhibition devoted to dirt bikes, actually, and there is a CR 250 as well. So there's certainly just you do appreciate the qualities of the object, as well as the fact they're this amazing vehicle speed. You mentioned that you were growing up in the 80s and riding bikes, and it was 1979 that those films came out, and that probably also had a bit of an impact on you.
Yeah, look, definitely. I mean, I think growing up in those environments, I mean, a lot of the filming that was done in the West, outside Laverton and different places where Miller, shot Mad Max and Werribee and so a lot of places we used to drive along, young adults and teens, and my father was always into bikes and cars as well. So it was just one of those, things, I guess, growing up in the western suburbs, being a very multicultural environment where, people didn't have a lot of money, and so they spent a lot of time sometimes. And it was a kind of, this masculine, misspent, identity, I guess, in a way where, if you had a cool car and did things like that, it showed that you were cool and all that. But, the reality is that's not the case. But that was something growing up in the West where it kind of gave you a bit of an appreciation, I guess, of those automobiles and bikes.
Yeah, it's interesting. The one at the end next to yours by Archie Moore, he made his as a tribute to his uncle. So his uncle had bikes, but they were made from scrap, bits and pieces that he kind of came by, and used to make these helmets with the horns on them. And he had plans for this grand bike that he was going to make. And so that's a homage in a way to Uncle Gary, that work. So yeah, there's nice connection there.
Your daughter rides, Reko. I saw a clip of you and your daughter riding.
Yeah. I got her. I got her into riding, young, within a safe environment, because I just thought it'd be something cool for both of us to do. And as as a parent, we don't want to put these notions of gender and identity, and you can do whatever you want to do when you set your mind to it. And so it was just something like, I thought, I asked her, do you want to have a go riding the bike? She's like, yeah, sure, let's do it. Yeah. And then it just started from there. And then, she's on a second bike now. So,
great.
And we go now and then. So it's cool. It's just a cool activity that we can do together and have a bit of fun and within a safe environment.
It's inspiring. We have a bike in the show that's ridden by Kim Krebs, who's the fastest woman in Australia on a motorcycle. She rides across the salt plains in South Australia. So yeah, that's a pretty spectacular bike to have in the show, and yeah, just cutting across those gender stereotypes that we sometimes have. Monika, let's just talk a little bit on that note about your helmet in terms of the stereotypical images of bike riding and the way in which you are sort of subverting that through the helmet.
Yeah, I wanted to contradict the stereotype of the tough biker that we all know. To start with, it took me a little while to get there, but I did a little research on Google and found that the number 13 could be an interesting title and maybe concept for the work. M being the 13th letter of the alphabet, which references meth or marijuana. So in like elite biker gangs, if you're wearing the number 13 as a patch or a ring, you could potentially be a dealer. So that was my starting point. And then I wanted to really play around with contradicting that, I suppose. And the flowers I painted on the helmet reference a style of botanist watercolor painting, but they have deeper meanings. Each flower has hallucinogenic qualities, similar to the works I did with Rochelle that you showed earlier with the dildos. The flowers are poppies, hellebore, belladonna, there's foxglove on the back, and they can all be used in different ways, cooked or sniffed or whatever. And by painting these flowers, yeah, I just wanted to really subvert the general idea. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess you might have had to take or grind up a lot of pansies to get what it is that the substance from the flowers. But,
yeah.
So,
yeah, there's different quantities and yeah, but there's a lot of them that are found in the backyard or general granny gardens.
Yeah, it does kind of go back to that idea of the that relationship to witchcraft as well. It's the idea of like foraging and plants found in your garden and that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I had some questions there for Sean, but I'm going to skip over them for the time being. We'll go on to your work, Reko, which is this work here. But in fact, as you've already mentioned, you have individualized other objects in the past. So you did a work for Vivid 2016 where you individualized the Opera House for Vivid. And then also you worked, as you mentioned before, you made a work of art for Defying Empire of, well, it was a Rolls Royce that you had, a gold Rolls Royce that you'd painted. And you made a video of that also that was shown in Venice, I believe.
Yeah. I did the Rolls Royce work because it was, I remember coming across a story of some early pastoralists that had had a Rolls Royce and a Bentley. There was a few of them, and these individuals would have, they'd go to church on a Sunday in their linen suits, and we're talking about 1905 to 1920 to 30 and 40. And at the same time, these pastoralists would also have, a couple hundred Aboriginal people enslaved on their properties. And so you had, these Aboriginal people enslaved on cotton farms and various pastoral stations. And then these white, colonial families that were driving this symbol of English royalty and, wealth and power, and going to church and being absorbed sins, so to speak. And I just thought it was an interesting relationship, given that my grandmother was one of those individuals that were enslaved on pastoral stations for nearly 10 years due to the Stolen Generations policies, form of government policies. And so I remember seeing some of those images, and I thought it'd be amazing to make a work with a 70s one, which was a similar year to when I was born, and then to take it up north to traditional country where my family's from, and then rather than doing traditional line work, because one of the practices, esoteric practices of the Kamilaroi people was to do sand engravings, and they'd do these elaborate sand engravings similar to some of the designs that you see on the totem poles that are in front there. And these would be for esoteric practices for men's and women's issues. And you know, I didn't want to replicate that because, you know, I'm not traditionally initiated, but I've come from an urban environment, and, you know, my work, you know, I've, you know, taken cars and done burnouts and things like that. And I wanted to kind of symbolize that reference and reference that experience of this inner city identity.
Did you hand paint the car?
Yeah, I did. I hand painted the car. I left the gold and just hand painted some line work and some camouflage on it, because, you know, in the past, a lot of the motifs throughout my work, the diamond and geometric symbols, they were outlawed and deemed paganistic when people were you know, incarcerated on these pastoral stations. And because people couldn't practice their culture, and these symbols were a form of, you know, they were a crest. They were, in a Western sense, they were like a crest, a family crest that other families could identify who you were. You know, there are 8 symbols, 4 male, 4 female. It was a matriarchal society. So women had, you know, of course, the power and the respect, and that's how it was. But then, you know, due to colonization, all these things were outlawed. And so I felt it was very, you know, I have the permission to use my family crest, the diamond symbol. And it's very important to use that because it's, you know, paying homage to that past connection, my ancestors, my community, my grandmother, and the people that were ostracized and victimized for their identity and persecuted. And so I use it in a contemporary sense. And, you know, one of these contemporary homages was a painting of a Rolls Royce doing burnouts, and then filming it and having Cave and the Bad Seeds to the soundtrack for it. So,
and that work went to Venice, and then earlier than that, in the 56th Venice Biennale, there was a work called Regalia, which brings in the diamond pattern and then the Aboriginal flag, as well as the crown, which again relates to that idea of sovereignty never being ceded.
Yeah, that's right. There was this emblematic statement about the original royalty of Australia, that being Aboriginal people rather than you know, the crown in England and the British monarchy. And so, you know, I use symbols and you know, like Monika, you know, we use symbols and imagery to subvert, you know, these romanticized notions of identity and places and what people think Aboriginal people should be and look like.
There's a real thread of subversion running through the helmets in a way, in terms of, well, Sean's turned his helmet upside down and put flowers in it. He's often, you know, changing the way in which we view or regard objects. And in fact, in his case, the flowers also relate to roadside memorials. The idea that motorcycling has its risks and this reference to death. And that's that sort of Vanitas tradition, which comes through in your work as well, Monika.
Mm-hmm.
So the still life, and, you know, that Dutch still life painting from the 17th century, people like Rembrandt, Vermeer, Rachel Royce, they were using that symbolism to talk about the fact that we are mortal, that we have, you know, a limited time on this earth. So there's this idea of flowers being in full bloom that will wither and die, and skulls and things. And so that comes through in both your work and Sean's in some ways.
Yeah. It's, yeah, I've been working with the Dutch tradition for a while. And I find it really interesting that this mortality is, you know, the fragility of flowers and short lifespan, and they often have caterpillars and bugs that sort of eat away at leaves and decay things. And there's also quite a few bubbles on my helmet, which, you know, have the same connotations, and they were also in Dutch paintings. Shortness of time, but Dutch painters wouldn't paint like a bunch of flowers on a table. They would be flowers that are gathered over time. So it's something interesting in that, where they would bloom in different seasons. So to have the bunch of flowers at once, they would have to paint the painting over a long period of time.
In segments, in parts, as
yeah.
bloom.
Yeah.
That's interesting because I think there was a few bugs in Sean's flowers when they came out of the box, which gave registration a bit of a scare, because I think he decided that he needed something quite authentic, and he had fresh flowers, artificial flowers that he bought, and he did a bit of a swap around. Unfortunately, apparently bugs live on artificial flowers as well. But yeah, but so just quickly going back then again to those references we were talking about a minute ago, Reko, in terms of the diamond pattern, because the blue and the diamond comes up in the helmet, and I guess that's got that same point of reference. Would that be correct in saying that?
Yeah, look, it's also an abstract homage to that, my personal connection, but also these symbols are also used as markers to identify community members and areas and land, and were part of songs, and certain symbols depicted flora and fauna and different seasons. And so I thought it's almost in a form, the helmets with the markings on it's like this message stick in a way that I'm if I was to be riding on a bike somewhere, I'm cruising along, and this is a visual marker and a branding of who I am. So I'm actually, this is my intention. I'm traveling and letting people know that, it's just me, this dude from Camilleri country. So that was the reasoning for the line work, and really simple. And I thought, again, you mentioned it earlier, but I play around with a lot of colour, and colour's very important throughout the work. And I think the beautiful Eve's Climb blue on the gloss black is just simple but an effective visual representation.
The colours definitely been a point of discussion. We put it onto display, and it just popped. Just really came out of the cabinet. It was really quite remarkable. But yeah, so this idea of the helmet. I mean, of course, these helmets can never be worn now because they've been individualized, which means whenever you apply something to the surface of a helmet, you can't actually wear it again. Plus, when I got the helmets from Iron Racing Garage, he explained that the shell size for the medium and the small was the same. The interior was different. So it didn't really matter what size we got, because we were just sending them to artists to recreate. And they all came back, I think, mostly small. Archie sort of said, I can't fit it on my head. It's like, well, yeah, no, it's an artwork now. But on a practical level, about just talking about the helmet itself, which I believe has been described as a 1960s motorsport aesthetic by the manufacturers. But I just wondered if we could talk a little bit about the practicalities of working on a surface like that, a convex surface in terms of the painting that you did, Monika, but also just the idea that, and you, Reko, as well. So this idea of how you adjust this convex shape in a way.
It was, when I started and there was the gloss paint with the glossy surface, I started to I was initially going to spray it matte so that the paint would stick, and then I thought I'd try it out because it was such a beautiful surface, try it out with just the oil paint straight on. And it seemed to dry fine, and it's still okay, so that's good. But I could only paint during a certain time of the day because both of the glosses would do some tricks to your eye, and you just couldn't see it. So I definitely couldn't paint in the evening with down lights. It had to be like morning light that I could work on it. I found that really interesting. And then because with a flat surface, you step back from it and take a look, but I could never see the painting as a whole. So I was constantly walking around it, but getting slightly frustrated that I couldn't see it. Yeah.
You needed one of the rotating props that we've got for the display.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Reko, did you find that similar sorts of challenges making your work?
Yeah, look, I thought I was going to get a matte one, to be honest, and then I saw it was gloss, and I was like, what can I put on it? So no, look, it's just painting on the form is a little, trying to, I didn't want to get the beautiful silver trimmings and the stainless dirtied or painted on. So I was trying to keep that looking pristine, but no, look, it was fine. Once I worked out, I actually done a bunch of sketches, and I thought originally I was going to put camo on, and I just thought it was it was going to be too much. And so then I thought maybe something simplistic in terms of the line work, and I like it. I think it worked really well. And it also comes back to, there was a lot of amazing art cars in the 70s that were being churned out. And of course, most notably would be Keith Haring's, the Chevy that he hand painted, and then later the Leyland, the Land Rover. And I always remembered seeing them, and I thought that was just really cool, just seeing the actual brush strokes. And
definitely get that with your helmet. And also in both cases, you have both taken there's quite a lot of simplicity to the work, and the painted sections just stand quietly against that black background. So is there anything else that from today's discussion that you'd like to add to or expand on before we go to questions?
Yeah, look, I think we've it's been great to have contribute some art to helmets, and there's a huge, as we know, particularly here and all over the world, there's a huge customizing scene with motorcycle and automotive industries, and there's these amazing artisans that really work in very specialized fields. And I think it's just, I suppose, looking at that, the Bitten motorcycle, the pink and blue, beautiful piece that's there, like just from custom spray jobs to, there's a lot of work that goes into creating these automobiles and motorcycles.
There's a custom bike in the show now. You might have to help me here, Reko. I think it's a Yamaha SR400. Does that sound right? SR400. It's a bike that Deus has customized for the and they've attached a surfboard to it. It actually transports a surfboard. It's called the Drover's Dog. That's the nickname. But yeah, the bike itself has been customized by Deus, and Deus has been quite involved with the exhibition in a number of different ways through the merchandise that we've worked on with them. And there's a nice kind of crossover between art and design in that respect. And I think in some ways the helmets are also an extension of that.
Yeah,
Can I ask, why can't these be worn? I don't really know the rules around that.
I believe it's just a safety thing that, it affects, by adding anything to the surface of the helmet, it actually affects its capacity as a safety object. So, that's something that the guys at Iron and Resin sort of pointed out to me right at the very beginning. And in fact, they were sort of encouraging me to cut the clips off, like the attachments off. But I thought I kind of trusted you guys. I didn't think I needed to do that, and I didn't really want to kind of destroy the object itself, because the whole point was that in some ways it was a really, really commanding object, and really wanted to leave it as close to as possible for you guys to work with once you received it and were inspired by the object.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so.
And they were too small to put on anyway.
Well, so. I think I don't know exactly, because I haven't tried to wear one, but Archie did, and he's like, "Hey, it's too small for me." You're like, "Archie, it's not."
Oh, I put it on. It was difficult to get off.
Well, maybe your daughter could. Your daughter might be able to grow into it when she gets.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or something. But I think I know, for example, Texture Queen, who's also contributed a helmet to the. Oh, sorry, just get to Texture Queen's work, which is just here on the left. This work, they've already posted theirs online, and they're raising funds towards, I think it's the defund the police. That's the sort of subject matter of their helmet, and they're raising money towards through an auction to sort of support that campaign. So that's what they've decided to do. But I think at one stage we were thinking we could potentially auction them, in terms of raising funds for the art sector, and then we decided that we just give the artists the helmets and leave it up to them as to what they wished to do with them after the exhibition was concluded. I'd like to finish by thanking all our speakers and our audience members for participating in today's Q&A. As you will have gathered, the artworks in full face provide a striking and thought-provoking counterpoint to the motorcycle design art desire, extending on its design focus and expanding the exhibition experience.